Lots of types of crime have decreased over the last several years. In the last couple of years, a particular type of crime, though, has increased and increased significantly, and that is gun violence. Gun violence is hyper concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods. And so I think as we think about where to invest and how to invest, we need to be really following the data. We have 50 wards in our city. The gun violence isn't evenly distributed across all 50 wards. So really thinking about the place-based and the people-based intervention so that we can be reaching the folks who are bearing the harm. The average age of a homicide victim in Chicago is 27 years old. And because, again, our city is so segregated, we see that geographically the gun violence is concentrated, and that means also within populations. Really thinking about making sure that resources are reaching the individuals really facing the sort of highest risk and bearing the greatest burden.
Well, one of the things we've seen is across the country, gun violence levels rising. And if you look over year, last year, about 48,000 Americans lost their lives to gun violence. About a little over half of those, maybe 58%, were suicide. But the one that really, I think, creeps into our consciousness is the targeted and mass violence, which in that 48,000 only represents about 2%, but it's growing, and it hits us in places that really terrify us. It hits us at the workplace. It hits us in schools. So targeted and mass violence, though a very small percentage in the overall violence, is really one that I think drives a lot of our consciousness. The biggest thing is I think that we're really understanding this issue in a much more comprehensive way. We're using public health models to look at violence, and particularly gun violence, and understanding that there's so many things we can do to prevent violence before it happens, whether it be targeted violence or mass violence or street level violence and even suicides. Now, the inputs for preventing that are different in each case, but the things that are common is that all of those inputs are deeply personal, deeply relationship based, and require a high level of touch, understanding, and focused resources at a very local level. So understanding the data, some of the tools, and some of the models of things that have really worked well at reducing gun violence has become really important. And now we have a better understanding of what that is than we did even just a few years ago.
To get to the root of why people feel that they need to arm themselves has so much to do with things that they need that they're not getting: food security, mentoring, stable housing, some sort of access to summer programs. I mean, there's a whole list of things that can make such a difference.
We've had over 150 mass shootings in the city of Chicago since January of 2020, meaning four victims or more, and we have sort of normalize that. So I think one of the really important, untapped levers is the recognizing the level of trauma exposure, young people growing up in neighborhoods that have such constant exposure to gun violence. And so really thinking about what are the ways to deliver high quality services to those young people so that we don't create the sort of intergenerational transmission of the violence itself. The majority of victims of gun violence are over the age of 18 and actually well into their 20s, but there still have been over 1,000 youth under the age of 18 who have been shot over the last couple of years. So what can we do to make sure that young people who are disengaging or frankly being pushed out, that we are trying to keep them connected to educational opportunities? Yet we have something like 25 to 30,000 young people in our home city of Chicago that are no longer actively enrolled in school. And that is a population that we really need to be focusing on and thinking about really making sure that organizations are serving those highest need individuals.
It's very coordinated, that every organization really needs to be owning the relationship with that individual, but they're probably not going to be great at everything that that individual needs once that relationship has been formed. So they have to coordinate with other organizations that might be good at job training or social services or dealing with housing insecurity, because it's very difficult to expect one organization to be able to do that. Being able to be consistent, where these organizations have the same challenges as any organization of strong, consistent leadership, good governance and board support, good accounting practices and human resources, wellness programs for those workers that are out doing this difficult work. Those are challenges for all organizations, but only heightened here because of the real hard work that this is. And finally, just maintaining that level of compassion. This is such specialized work and really requires somebody that is deeply, deeply committed to connecting and engaging and building that trusted relationship that all of those services and all of that, the potential change will follow from, really a trusted relationship.
You know, I think it's also important to recognize that street outreach is necessary but not sufficient, that it's not just the ability to build that relationship, but it's also recognizing and providing the resources to be able to stabilize individuals. And so making sure that those street outreach organizations aren't just doing kind of in the moment sort of de-escalations, but also are in a position to be able to connect those individuals to the resources and support that they need to be stabilized, whether it's housing, whether it's reconnecting them to school, whether it's trauma and mental health services.
Find a group that really understands and is part of the community where the violence is happening that it wants to serve. The guy I mentioned in Philadelphia, Donnell, knows that he can't work this job as a 9-to-5 job doing violence interruption, that's not when the violence is happening. It's happening between like 11 at night and 2 in the morning. And that's when he's out there on the street saying, hey, don't do this.
In the communities or a community that really does have a significant challenge, are they actually reaching the population, not just doing work in the neighborhood, but if your goal is to reduce violence, if you're just serving the kids who have perfect attendance and are signing up for every other social program, it's great, those kids can benefit from it, but it's not a violence prevention program.